carport, boating facility, event center, community gathering place, tourist destination.
Tony asked me to kick off the conversation here by just kind of reminding,
You're a harbor master.
just kind of reviewing what we've discussed specifically in that last council presentation. And we came to talk about how our bridge revenues have decreased over the last 5 years, and another problem is they become more variable. We talked about some of the expenses that have increased significantly, mostly debt service and the DNR lease, and how as a result the Marina Fund can no longer support the general fund and the Marina Capital Plan and the Marina Capital Improvement Plan. We also talked about some long-range problems in that presentation and the one before. Remember the 2007 master plan. Part of that, Paul had built a real extensive financial model that projections out over the 20-year life of those bonds, and in that plan, mortgage revenue, we based mortgage revenue on a 3% growth. 3% growth programmed in, and over the last 5 or 6 years, we haven't gotten that. And you know about interest and compounding and time, and in this case, time is the enemy of it. That revenue is just gone forever. We're not going to get that back. So that's recalibrated that whole growth trajectory, and it set us up for some real problems in the future, specifically that 2025 period when we're going to have some difficulties with being able to fund enough or come up with enough funds for all the replacements that are going to be needed at that time. Some of my tenants always are taking me to task a little bit over this presentation because they think I paint too bleak a picture of what's going on with especially recreational boating. 2 months ago, at the start of the season, 3 months ago when the season started, I was very concerned about revenues and salmon fishing, a whole host of issues but we've had a better season than expected. We had a whole month and a half that we didn't really count on, good weather. Just about all of our revenue streams were up a little bit, or meeting expectations, or slightly exceeding expectations. Just talked to our boatyard manager yesterday. He said his revenues at the boatyard were up 30% over last year. So people are returning to boating, and we can see ourselves, like everybody else, all the other businesses around, we can see ourselves climbing out of the recession. Now, look, it's still a little unclear what's going to happen in another decade and a half. We have, who's going to be in boating and what recreational boating is going to look like. But for the immediate future, I'm talking the next 5 to 10 years, if we can get the expenses under control and we can address some of these long-term liabilities, the marina will remain a viable business. There's no doubt in my mind about that. To that end, at that meeting on the 25th, we talked about several recommendations, and they're all here in the packet, but central in that, in all of those, was what is the marina's purpose? Is the marina fund, is the main priority supporting the general fund? Or do we continue with the current business model that includes some supporting some of the other council goals, like promoting the city, like our guest storage program, promoting the city, bringing people in, hopefully helping some of our downtown businesses, supporting special events, supporting public access, non-voting public access, those kinds of things. So again, we at this meeting, what we'd like to do is pose that question. Should our main focus be maximum net revenue, or should we continue with the business model we have now? And struggle with this a little bit because Tony and I talked about it, and sitting here today, it's a little hard to tell. What's the difference? Hey, we want it all, maximum revenue and all this stuff. But I think if we pursued a mindset, of just maximizing our net revenue on the marina floor, you get down the road 5 years, that's going to be quite a bit different than the path we're on now. And we're talking about development, commercial development on the Marine Corps. So it plays into how intensively we do that and how much area we're going to devote to that. So a whole host of questions. And that's really what we would like to discuss today. Are we stay on the path that we're on, or do we change our course and focus more intensively on maximizing the revenue?
Oh, I'd love to hear that one.
What's that?
I'd love to start and respond to that one.
Yeah, please go ahead and weigh in.
It's always been fascinating over the years to watch the Marina and its development and what have you. I can recall not too long ago, I think most people here will remember it, we had sling launch. And boy, when we talk about taking that away, we had all kinds of responses from people, both locally and outside the city, a lot of them from outside. I remember receiving emails from people that would say that we as a city, or city council, had a responsibility regionally to their needs. That one I always found especially unusual, because in the minds of a lot of people, they do believe that we're there to service their needs. I've gotten away from that kind of thinking. To me, and I hinted on this earlier, the marina should be approached as a business like any other business. If it isn't making money, then we need to get rid of whatever element is there that is causing red ink. We can only, and I hinted on this like I said earlier, if it doesn't produce revenue, then we don't need it. We should concentrate only on those things that we can reasonably assume will keep us in black ink, and as much as possible. Beyond that, I don't think we have any obligation to anyone at all, locally or regionally, to continue to provide something that is only going to be an expense to us. Period. And if we take that approach, I think we can possibly see a marina being a little more viable, a lot more viable in the future than it currently is. It sounds mean and harsh, but it's a reality. And that's the only way business ever succeeds. What you say?
Jeanette?
Yeah, I think people might have gotten the idea that the marina should provide some public service because it's owned by a public entity. And when the marina was first proposed by a developer, the city denied the permit and then built it themselves. So there must be some public purpose for it if the public owns it. The city is a public entity. But I agree it would be nice if we could provide those services and still keep the marina going. But we need to concentrate first on the basic services that are needed to run the marina.
I'll tell you where I'm coming from. The marina is a business. I agree with Bob. Its first and foremost thing is it needs to succeed as a business. It needs to be in the black, not in the red. To that degree, I mean, the city has been transferring essentially what amounted to profits when the marina was profitable, to the general fund to help fill the back hole, the hole that was created by the passage of 695 and the elimination of our second leading source of revenue, which was the sales tax equalization funds. And I know that apparently, prior to my ever being on council, apparently there have been times where money was also transferred out for city operations prior to that. The marina has to be on a sound financial footing in terms of its own operation and the services it provides, which speaks to what the role or the purpose of the marina is, Joe, which is what your question is. And first and foremost, it has to be a marina. Okay? I mean, that's its number one priority. To the degree, I think we benefited from the marina in the fact that it's supported city services above and beyond the costs that it bears from direct use of finance department, legal, and the rest of it. But the transfer or the amount that's paid into the general fund of the city needs to be reduced to that minimum. And it needs to happen sooner rather than later. I don't think it's a one-year thing, which is why I think budgetary we're not going to get here in 1 year, but it might be a 2-year thing to get to that point in time. I think also to that extent, it speaks to some of the prioritization in terms of the capital improvements that need to happen. For example, anything that would help bring in additional revenues should be moved up sooner rather than later. Because there's two pieces. Reducing the costs, I think that got mentioned in terms of trying to get our legislators to reduce the leases by passing legislation down there to treat us the same as harbors and ports are treated in terms of the lease rates. And providing access to the jetty, working cooperatively with the Des Moines Yacht Club to get people over to the jetty to be able to take advantage of that as well. So that'll help reduce the cost of those of the leases because of the public access. If yanking D dock and being able to open up C and E to larger vessels is going to bring in revenue, to me that makes sense as something to do sooner rather than later. It's far less costly than doing the bulkhead work that needs to be done in the north parking lot. It's something that will provide revenue coming back to the city. It's something that, from the standpoint of being able to pay for it from existing revenue streams, if it meant tying up our real estate excise tax for, let's say, a 10 or 15-year period of time, it's probably something that could be done in relatively short order. What I would want is an estimation of how much additional revenue would come in, or how much revenue would come in from being able to lease the larger boats on an expanded E-dock plus the C-dock availability there, with an eye toward having that money go into the maintenance and repair account. So there, for a period of time, say 5 years or 6 years, there was a dedicated funding source to go in that, so we start accumulating the money there and then figure out or do the things that we need to do to make sure that from an operational standpoint that we're getting to balance or to back in the black without that money. So then after a period of time, whether it's 5 years, 6 years, whatever number you come up with, then you've got an ongoing revenue stream to add to your operations on an ongoing basis, which will put us in a better footing for some of the larger, more expensive, longer-term capital improvements that we have to make. We can't divorce the fact that it is our largest open public space in terms of being able to hold events in the city. And so that's not going to go away. How those services are supported, though, whether that's a function relative to Parks and Rec, whether it's something that the Marina is expected to handle, I don't know what the answer to that is. I'm curious to hear what my fellow council members have to think about that. But I think first and foremost, it's got to be run as a business and not as a contributing source of revenue to the city's general fund. I think over time you'll see things occur that will contribute to that. You've got some programmatic suggestions in terms of what do you do with the guest moorage. Do you take some of that and make it permanent moorage? And I don't know what the answers to those are, because I think there's an advantage to the city of bringing people in from all over the place in terms of being able to take advantage. Our businesses benefit from that, not just down in the Marina, but it brings people to town, and in the same way that the farmers market does. It gives people an eye toward what our city's about. So, anyway, those are my thoughts, and Jeremy?
I have to agree with David and Bob and Jeanette. It's got to be run as a business. I see the gas mortgage thing. I think it's going to be more viable in the future than it is today. It brings people to town, yes. The services that we're able to provide that any other city with a marina has close to the water are diminishing on a weekly basis. And hopefully we're on the uphill swing as opposed to on the downhill swing. But I see that as a revenue stream in the future. I agree with bringing bigger boats in if that's going to be, if that's going to generate more revenue. And I said it shortly after I got on the council that the transfer to the general fund has got to be lowered and just pay for the services that they're providing. And as Dave said, that whether that's in 1 year, it's not going to happen in 1 year or 2 years, but it needs to happen sooner than later. That's where I'm at.
On the expenses that the marina uses in our, for overhead with the city, I'm not sure how much that is, but even that, the city gets services, like when we have the farmer's market down there, that's a plus for the city that we're paying nothing for. So, I mean, ideally, those would probably balance out, that whatever overhead was used from the city, that the city got from using the marina.
I'm not sure I'm understanding, because the farmer's market pays some sort of rent to the marina, correct? Yeah. Yeah. So the marina has, from the lease of its upland, in the same way that CSR pays, or
But I guarantee you the amount that the farmer's market is paying to us, rent is not covering the city's costs of supporting the farmer's market, the rent costs. If you look at what Joe's crew does, even some of Patrice's folks, everything that we do, the equipment that we provide, the restroom facility that they get to use, et cetera, what they are paying does not cover those costs.
but they also contribute to the city more than just bringing in thousands of people to it as well.
And
So there's trade-offs.
And I get that too, and I'm gonna be a little bit of a, I don't know exactly what I'm gonna be here, but I'm gonna say these things anyway. So the farmer's market brings 4,000 people every Saturday to the city. If every one of those people spends $10 of a type of spending that's sales tax, that's 10 cents to the city. And so that's $40 of sales tax we just got from 4,000 people spending $10 of sales tax eligible expenses. Most of the people that are showing up at the farmer's market are buying stuff that is not subject to sales tax. Yes, we have the craft vendors and the other things, but all the food is not. And then if they go to the restaurants, which I know they do.
Wait a minute, you said $40,000 in sales, that's $400 to the city, right? Not $40.
Okay, it's 400, okay, that's one point. But that means that they all have to spend $10 worth of stuff, and a lot of them don't. There is that nice extra traffic for the businesses in town. I think that's a good thing because it keeps them alive. And we can certainly do an analysis of how much money we really think the farmer's market is resulting in, just from a pure financial basis. But from a cost to the city basis, they're not covering their costs directly just for what they're getting from us.
I do agree that it has to run as a business, and we need to find, actually, this discussion will help us when we look at whatever possible development agreements we set up with Good Fit and so forth. Because I'm not sure that, based on what I'm hearing today, that those, at least the early ideas, are necessarily as valid as they were when they were first put on the table. But I also think it is I mean, one of the things about living in Des Moines is that we have a marina in the town. And we have waterfront in Redondo. So to some degree, although they have to be considered, I understand the business aspect of it, it's also a community asset. And so I'm not saying that means you can't treat it as a business, but I think that you have to be mindful of its contribution to the community, and you have to see it and be able to deal with things in that light, which I'm not, when you go pure business, it's going to be about revenues minus expenses, but where do the profits from the business go? They either go into the redevelopment of the business, or the benefit of its customers, or they end up in the city coffers. So that's why I'm saying we have to be a little bit careful when we look at things just from a business standpoint.
Well, every business like has its loss leader, so to speak, and this could very well be one for the marina if you're going to look at it from the standpoint of a business. It attracts people in there, but you're not going to make any money. A lot of department stores and what have you have something like that. They call it a loss leader. So, I think this is one of those things that when you look at farmers market, there is a great deal of benefit that comes out of it. As far as goodwill and what have you, that doesn't necessarily benefit the city profitably. Like should it be done away with? Probably not, because it's one of those things that, like I said, it's kind of like a business loss leader.
And please don't get me wrong. What I'm
No, I know
trying-
what you-
what I'm trying to do is generate this exact kind of discussion, that there's different reasons, different benefits, some of them quantifiable, some of them not, of what happens on the marina floor. And
I understand.
in one breath, you say it's a business and it needs to be treated like a business. Well, if this was a business, we would be charging the farmer's market more to cover the direct cost to the marina, because all those other sales tax type of dollars and things that I talked about, those go to the general fund. They don't go back to the marina.
But the question about these direct costs, okay, you're talking about staff time, okay? You're talking about X percentage of electricity or whatever that might get used for the 4 hours a month or 4 hours a week. Those are relatively small. The marina in and of itself should be making money, even if there wasn't one stinking event that's held in the marina. So to me, the use of the marina and appropriately charging for the use of those public facilities in the same way that we would look at it for the beach park or field house or anything else, we need to look at those and take that into consideration. And I know that for nonprofits, the municipal facilities community is taking a look at that and is making a recommendation in regard to that. And I think the same kind of a policy should apply. But that doesn't get to the bottom line as to how the marina itself operates and what needs to be done to make sure that that in and of itself as a business entity is profitable. And that's why I see a distinction. If tying up staff time supporting the farmers market and these events is substantial enough that there's things that aren't getting done, then that's of a cost to the city. If on the other hand, it's not detracting from our ability to get things done, and that the real issue is capital investment, and which I suspect most of it is, although we're having to do more maintenance because we haven't been able to make the capital investments that we need to when we want to, then we have that's a short-term thing. It's not a long-term thing. So I guess I struggle with that being an impact on how the marina, whether the marina makes money or not. To me, it's a different calculus. It's not it's an ancillary or tangential thing. It's not something that directly impacts the marina. The marina is not out any opportunity cost for something happening in the north parking lot, regardless of what it is, whether it's the strongman competition or whatever. We're not missing any revenue opportunities by those things being there. So That's what I'm getting at, is I'm talking about on an ongoing basis, since it's the marina tenants and the upland tenants who are actually paying to make the marina, pencil out. That's the calculus we need to figure out. The other is, to me, that's the tangential, that's the secondary.
I think that there is value to certain things that create goodwill. And I think the farmer's market, and you brought it up, so I'm just gonna, and I know why you did it. I know exactly why you did it. You're playing a little bit of devil's advocate, okay? But there is a value to goodwill, and I see that. And the farmer's market is a good example of that. What I'm referring to, and I think Dave is getting the same message across, is that when I hear things like a harbor master says to me, look at the cost of guest moorage versus a transition into a dock that would have bigger boats and get, okay. I can recall not too long ago, you and I and Joey Jewell and a few other people got really excited about bringing in those boats from different clubs and what have you to the city. I mean, we were jumping up and down.
Joe and I had this conversation 2 weeks ago.
Okay.
Absolutely, we were very happy about
And
that.
I remember leaving those meetings going, boy, are we on the right path now. And Joey went out there, to his credit, did an outstanding job recruiting those people and getting them into the city and having all kinds of events and what have you. Thought that was that was the end of our problems. It wasn't. It wasn't. So now we have a harbor master in front of us going, maybe we should reevaluate this. Maybe it would be more cost efficient to have these converted into docks that will pay on an ongoing basis year round at a much higher rate than we could ever get from guest moorage. That's what I'm talking about. Those are the things that we should be looking at as far as the business end of it is concerned. Not necessarily a farmer's market, because again, I just say that's nothing but goodwill. And what value do you place on goodwill? You don't, because you can't. But that's a perfect example of what we should be thinking about.
Jeanette?
Joe's had his hand up for a while.
Huh?
Oh,
Sure. Go ahead, Jeanette.
I think the, putting in for the larger boats might, in the short term, help with the revenue, but if we are working still with the developer to put businesses on the marina floor, we're gonna need customers for those businesses, and the guest moorage would be a place to get some of those customers. So I'm a little worried we might benefit a little while in the short term, but not for long.
So how do we get to the point where we know the answer to these questions? Do we do an analysis on it?
Stand after the
Joe, go ahead.
Just a little bit more information for the discussion. On the farmer's market, I agree with everything that's been said. I think what Tony and I talk about is when you talk about, and this plays into commercial development also, is when you talk about all of our assets, we have to think about what is the true cost, the total cost of owning and operating the facility.
Yeah.
There's a big capital component to that, and that's what we're ignoring. Now, we haven't ignored the tenants in that, because you go back even into the early 2000s when we did that original master plan. Remember, in our rate structure, there was an actual capital component we added to their rates. And we basically went to that same analysis in the 2007 rate increase, which was the largest in the history of our marina. And again, the whole justification was capital. So that's, when we talk about the uplands, I think that's what we're trying to say also, is that how do you get a return on the rental of those upland areas that addresses the capital part of it. I just want to go back to public amenities and how difficult this whole thing is, and you talked about that. And let's talk about the boardwalk at Redondo and the public fishing pier. Now, those are two of the most well-used public facilities in South King County.
Right.
We have no obligation to keep that public fishing pier. We could tear it down tomorrow.
Right.
It is a pain in the rear to clean that thing every day. But if you take a look, and again, here's the dilemma. If you take a look at everything about Des Moines, that darn fishing pier's in it. Every beautiful picture that's on the website, everything about Des Moines is that public fishing pier. Well, the same thing's happening at Redondo. People have now associated Redondo with that boardwalk, and thousands of people use that every year. And how do we create a revenue stream that's going to support those public amenities? And that's why I keep banging that parking drum. And then just a little bit of information on the dock reconfiguration. We did do that analysis several, as part of our capital plan several years ago. Reconfiguring D, E, and F docks is basically based on current rates and current occupancies. Would be revenue neutral, maybe in the worst case, slightly negative revenue in those first years. But as it filled up, what it gives you basically is what we don't have now with those small slips, is a kind of pricing power. I mean, we just keep reducing the rates till we fill them up. If we reconfigure and get the bigger slips, then we go back to where we can come back and increase those rates, at least by the CPI. So,
Bob?
Thank you, I bow to you, okay? Because you touched upon something that I was going to wait until later on to discuss, because it just gets so many people pissed off at me. And I had enough of that. But how much time, Melissa, did your committee spend looking at paid parking?
4 months' worth of municipal facility meetings, not to mention a summer full of counting cars and revenue analysis based on if
A
it's
lot of
making,
time.
yeah.
A lot of time, okay? And the recommendation came back is, look what we could do, you know? I thought that all of a sudden, we had a Joey Jewel going again. That, my God, out of this committee comes the savior of what it's going to take to keep, Marina viable.
Not a savior,
And-
at least a little life support.
Well, more than life support. It would have kept a lot of people from drowning, okay? Granted, not a Titanic thing, but it went nowhere. It's like it died before my very eyes. And I gotta encourage people here to take that, dust it off, and take a very serious look at this, because this is what I've been saying earlier. It may not be the popular thing to do. It may get some people really pissed off. But if you're going to run the marina, and you've got a revenue source that's there, and how many marinas out there are actually charging for these kind of things? We're not, because we're buckling into some pressure from some people that believe that they have some right to these benefits that they've been receiving all these years. They don't. And we need to look seriously at this paid parking. Very, very seriously, and bring it back and enact it. Make it happen.
Melissa, and then Jeanette.
So,
Everybody
the
would have done.
the huge increase in the DNR lease increased substantially not that long ago, right? And so we've played with the idea of, getting access to the jetty and making it a public. And so we can have guesses on revenue streams and how the revenue will come in, but we can control expenses. And that, to me, is a very controllable expense, that we've got a plan in place that we can reduce a huge percentage of the money going out. I mean, I look at that, we've not really spent enough time getting into that aspect of
The short answer to that is that staff has attempted to set up meetings with the yacht club in order to have that conversation, and depending upon who you talk to at the yacht club, they get up to the 11th hour and then the meetings get canceled or whatever. So what's going to happen, and Tony and I actually had this conversation, what's going to happen this next time is that I or Matt are going to go with staff to sit down and talk with them and put the political discussion as part of it, to say, look, we need to have this conversation in order to help facilitate.
Well, then let's implement a carrot and a stick. I mean, don't they have access to a city launch
And
that they pay almost nothing to use?
And I will say, I have a few carrots to throw at them. I can't get an opportunity to even do that.
Well, then we increase the
So-
rates and force them to the table.
Well, that's disappointing, because we met their Commodore, and he said he was very open to the idea of how to work with the city and so on.
Is that Mr. Massaro?
don't recall.
Well, I've spoken to him several times, and I told him but very clearly, here's what I can offer you. Here, we can talk about reducing your rates, we can talk about maybe launching on your ramp and sharing some of those dollars for you. We can talk about a lot of things that would be to your advantage.
This isn't a substantive issue at this point, it's a communication issue, and just overcoming that barrier. But I just had this conversation, was it yesterday or 2 days ago? Yeah, so, it's going to happen.
It just becomes too critical of an issue, though, to let people, whoops, we have to reschedule. What teeth do we have to put in place that they can't just reschedule it?
Well, I mean, we could terminate the existing agreement, even though it's supposedly in perpetuity, we could take it to court and have it thrown out if we wanted to really use that as teeth.
Or we'll, cancel the agreement, or do we increase the cost to use the facilities to the point where they have to come to the table and
Well,
talk?
that's a possibility as well.
We should make this a short-term objective.
Absolutely.
Joe?
Just a couple thoughts on the jetty walk. I love the idea because it would quickly become as popular as the fishing pier and boardwalk. But it's not an easy project in any phase of it. So it would be there's some money. There'd be a significant investment up front. I think as a plan B, I think we should keep that going. But as a plan A, we need to get this legislature to give us the same treatment as the port district. That eliminates our lease, and that doesn't take an investment on our part. And even in the worst case, there's no reason why they shouldn't be selling us that lease area B, which is at the foot of the fishing pier and where the public restroom is. That parcel meets every requirement laid out in the state law for transfer or sale. And those remedies are, I mean, it'll take our time, but we really need to put a full court press on them.
And I'm sure other council members are willing to go out and testify in that legislation. The challenge there is that the state is scrambling for money, and they're expecting every department to basically maintain or bring in additional revenues, and so they're going to be reticent to give up $100,000 from us, let alone Oak Harbor. But that doesn't mean that we're not going to pursue it. But realistically, and anything the legislature touches is typically a 2 to 5 year timeline horizon on things. It's not going to happen overnight. So there are other things that might be.
Well, we do have a stick, and that's the jetty walk. Because we can go to the legislature and say, hey, we put in the jetty walk, the lease goes away.
Yeah.
So either way, it's just we have. It's more of an expense for us, and then we have to keep it up. But hey, if you want to play that card, we'll just put in the jetty walk, and the lease goes away anyway.
Jeanette?
I was wondering if we had sponsors for the bill.
Yes.
To put that into too.
Tina Orwell is ready, and the representative from Oak Harbor is ready.
And
So we
then,
just need to get information to them.
but before that, I was on the parking issue. I think part of the difference between our marina and other marinas as far as parking is what they're in proximity to, like the beach park, residential, and our business community. So it may be if we're going to put pay parking in the marina, we're going to have to put meters on the residential streets just above the marina, and then we'll have to put meters in the downtown shopping area as well, because they'll move. They're pretty close there.
I think there's X number of people who are going to wind up parking in downtown and walking down.
They do it now.
Yeah, but most people aren't going to do that. Most people are, and there's been some strategies talked about where for the residents you could give them, a pass either for $5 a year or even for free, conceivably, and
I like that idea.
and then what you're capturing are the others,
80% of the people.
the 70% or whatever. But the issue about the paid parking is, while I think that it's the most likely outcome, the thing I think, Bob, is that we didn't tee the issue up right. We didn't talk about to the public that, look, you're using it, and you're not contributing to it. They don't understand that. They think their taxes go to support the marina instead of it being the marina tenants.
Yeah,
who are
I
actually-
would agree with you.
and so there was this knee-jerk reaction, and I think we need to have that conversation so that, and give them an opportunity to suggest some potential options in terms of how they can contribute to maintenance of the marina. And if the least objectionable, and I suspect it will be, is the paid parking, then you still get to where I think it's going to go. But I don't think people felt like they had a chance to weigh in, that they didn't understand what the issue is, and I think before we pursue that necessarily as quote-unquote the solution, I think we need to have the conversation with the public as part of these periodic meetings that we talked about earlier, and ask, educate them as to the needs of the marina, the fact that they don't contribute to it, and what their suggestions are. Because if at least they've had an opportunity to have that, to offer things up, to weigh in, then when we come to whatever conclusion we come to, then at least they'll have felt that they were heard. And we didn't do that. And that's the frustrating part, is because the committee did bust its butt, and I know Joe and Patrice really worked hard to look at those options. The problem is we didn't bring the public along with us on it, and so now we're having to go back and educate them about the needs.
So let's do it.
Yeah.
Let's just do it.
Okay, so I think in the end, my prediction is that we'll wind up coming to that conclusion because it's more attractive than raising property taxes or doing some other thing, especially when 70% of the users are from outside the area. So I think that I think we're going to get there, but I think we need to do the educational piece, and we haven't done that. So I foresee where that can become, that there's going to be some revenue piece that related to that.
Let's make it a goal for this coming year.
It should be on the short-term list.
I think that's our revenue, marina revenue goal.
Yeah, I'd like to be more specific.
I wouldn't say parking without asking the public what they think.
I think we just have to put a bullet on it that says something about addressing marina revenues in both the short and long term to make sure.
I can support that. Stand alone, be specific.
Yep.
You okay with that?
Yeah, I'm good with that.
Jeremy? Okay, let's do it.
I've already got
Sure.
noted an item called create a financially sustainable plan, or financial sustainability plan for the marina. Is that
Is that
captured
a
as short
short-term?
term? I got that as a short-term goal.
Yeah, so
Okay.
it's wrapped up in that, so, okay, we got it covered.
So, actually, I'm sorry, let me just say, create a financial sustainability plan for the marina, including a public input process.
Yeah, we should.
We add that in?
Yeah, you absolutely need
Yep.
Do it.
Patrice?
I had to step away for a moment to help a customer, but there was a lot of, Joe and I have had a lot of discussion about the north lot, the parking lot, and the potential for the demise, I'd say, of the bulkhead there along the north parking lot and around in front of the beach park as well. We've got some really aging facilities that could deteriorate and be gone any
Yeah,
day.
a blue house there that could fall into this.
And so, and one of the things, I don't want to discount the opportunity, the public opportunity for those facilities, because if the parking lot's gone, public access to those facilities is gone. Public access to the beach park, public access to the marina. And so we will be in a crisis situation when that happens. They're being undermined right now.
Right, but the other thing is, though, being able to afford that $4 million project means taking a bunch of money out of operating expenses, so whose department wants to get hacked in order to be able to pay for the bonds on an ongoing basis to meet that obligation?
I just wanted to mention, though, that there are matching grants that would be available for that. So if we're anticipating doing that type of a project, we can probably get 50% of the match from the state or through the federal voting program because of public access to the beach, public access to the water. So it doesn't have to be necessarily a $4 million
And it doesn't
price
have to
tag.
be free public access to the
Right.
water.
Correct.
Jim?
Yeah, I just want to reinforce that because if you remember when we did the first bulkhead project, part of the reason we selected that section of bulkhead was because of our future development plans. We wanted to isolate those parcels. But the other thing was that we determined that that section of bulkhead from the marina lot or the marina office to LDOT was our most vulnerable piece of bulkhead. And so just doing the risk assessment, the office is there, every utility in the Western Hemisphere is in there, the boat yard's there. So when you think about losing a chunk of bulkhead, that was the most risk. Now, we get down the line 5 or 6 years, when you think about the north lot, at the time, 5 years ago, if we lost the north bulkhead, we lost some asphalt. But now, if we lose the north bulkhead, because we've got this business built up in the beach park, and we moved the farmer's market to the north, and that's been incredibly successful. So what we're risking now is much more than we were risking 5 years ago. It's like Bob said, things change, So I agree with Patrice, and then to the extent that we've changed it from, now that we don't do the public, or we don't have the launch there anymore, we can really make a case that that's almost pure public access. So that opens us up to a lot more granting possibilities. And if we go back, we have the King County Safe Boat there now, so they're a partner. We go back to try to hit port security grants. The RCO is standing by to upgrade the fishing pier in that part of the bulkhead because they want to lock that up again because it's currently not, like I mentioned. So there are some possibilities there that we could leverage what money we do have in the north lot.
Okay, but what's the net that the city still has on the hook for? Is it 2 million, is it 3 million? You wind up with one out of, see, the thing is, we probably financially can sustain $2 million in bonds based on a committal of real estate excise taxes and or general fund monies if we had to make such a commitment. But, 3 million or 4 million is going to be a stretch. And we're not going to know probably from 2 years what the true cash flow to the city is from the businesses that come in the course of the next year. So there's no predictability on how you pay our share, which would have to be financed by bonds, against whatever match we wind up with. So does it make more sense though to do the one that is going to bring in at least net? It sounds like net break even in terms of what DEF docs.
Yeah.
Or potential for more? Or does it make more sense to commit to something that we're going to wind up eventually having to do anyways? It might get some money for, but it's going to be a huge stretch to pay the debt service on if you do it. I mean, either way, it's going to have to be the city that winds up floating the bonds and not the marina specifically itself,
Sure.
relative whatever improvements, at least for the next go-around or two. And so that has implications for everything in the city. So I don't, I see what you're saying, but I don't know what the likelihood of getting the grants is either. And is it something that will take 2 or 3 years before you wind up with it, or?
Correct. I mean,
Yeah.
we start planning now, we're looking at probably 4 years before we could put it, get all the pieces in place to get it done. So we're talking, 5 years from now. But if we don't start planning for it now and doing the analysis, we're
You
going
don't
to be...
forget, you still have to design it, you got
Yeah.
to permit it,
Yeah.
there's certain windows of time
Yeah.
you can and can't do construction. What I'm thinking though is this sustainability plan for the marina has got to include exactly what we're talking about here, which is replacing those parts of the marina that are at risk of failing tomorrow, definitely within the next 5 years, and the north bulkhead is number one.
But I'll tell you, my number one priority before we ever get to the capital side is going from red to black on the operating side, or the rest of it means nothing.
And
And so anyhow, that's, I mean, that's,
I agree with you.
we've got short, midterm, and long-term, you know, here, and we need to figure out what fits what category. I don't mind going out and asking for grants if I know that we're essentially committing the city to floating bonds 3 years from now or whatever in order to build that facility. But that means our having to make a commitment now in order to do it, right? And
Well, you don't have to make a commitment this second, but if we analyze it and see what we can give you kind of the timeframe for when you have to commit to what, and how much, and how, and, you know. Then you can
And I
decide.
think
if we're
there's-
betting on future.
There is, but when we do this plan, I think it also needs to be remember, it's a financial plan, so we have to analyze, go back all the way to what we started talking about, our revenue options, and how those might fit into a financial plan, both for operations and for debt service. And paid parking, I think, is one of them. Marina floor development is another one. We are still talking with the company that I started talking to. They've made a couple of big leaps just in the last couple of days. They've hired an attorney. They're actually starting to talk. Matt, believe it or not, that is a big deal.
It is a big deal, but I'm laughing at it because we first started the conversation with them,
Over a year ago.
you know,
And we gave them a
they're
Fisher
now
cut
taking
date.
it seriously?
We gave them a Fisher cut date of next to Thursday, the 20th. And if they don't respond appropriately, we're going to tell them that we're happy to talk to you, but we're going to go look for other options.
Well, I understand, but I also think that we need to, you know, if we've got a bulkhead that can fail and undermine that north parking lot, we're going to have to think about what kind of development opportunity. We've already talked about parking and everything else, but not just the paid parking, but having to come up with some kind of a municipal parking or something down there. Because if you start putting buildings in where you had parking spaces, you have more of an issue. I'm just having to wonder if we shouldn't be, in the light of some of these conversations, saying, well, you know, I've looked at this whole comprehensive thing to, at one point, seeing a picture with a hotel and a tennis court on top of it. I'm thinking, you know, we've got dry storage that doesn't seem to generate a ton of revenue and use for the marina. But
It's
if you,
pretty significant still for us. Yeah.
okay, but
About 140.
if that were replaced with a permanent structure that could house year-round business, would that be a better opportunity for you? I don't know the answer to that.
Well, I think an opportunity is to incorporate our dry shed business and in a parking structure. So, because that's going to be the precursor to everything we do down there, some kind of a parking structure. And we talked about that, how if we build it correctly, we could keep our dry shed business and have a deck over it for parking. Possibility of maybe moving the marina office into that structure, so we totally free up that other parcel for development. And then as our dry shed business, I do expect it to fade away because it will, the salmon's going to fade away. But as that fades away, we can transition that into a winter storage business. But we've got one started now in our open lot. And then we would, I think, what Michael's told us, I know we've talked about parking structures. The big problem with parking structures for us is there's no revenue there in the winter. You know, so in the off season, if there's a revenue stream associated with it that we could keep there, then it starts to make it more viable. And then when that development does come to that prime piece of that parcel where we have the office, we have parking already there.
But we can't just replace the parking that's going to be taken out by the footprint of whatever gets built. We have to have more than we have
We
now,
have to have
because
more.
it's obvious we don't have adequate for what we have now.
But if you think down, we give ourselves 5 or 6 years to get there, let's say the dry shed business just continues to deteriorate, and we replace that with winter storage, which, like I said, we've got that business going over in the open lot now. Then in the summertime, when we need it, we've got 2 layers of parking where before we had a bunch of white sheds.
But we have other issues. I mean, if CSR is doing as well as they're doing, does it make sense to expand their footprint, by a third or a half or something, or 50%, get ongoing lease money out of them that's more substantial than what you were ever getting out of the dry steads, and you're bringing business, they've got more capacity to handle more boats to repair and maintain.
I suspect that they would like a little more space, but what they really want is a new building.
Yeah.
And that's going to mean reconfiguring that yard, maybe adding some more space to it. But I think they're like every other business in the country right now. They want to keep their expenses as low as possible. And what they concentrate on is what kind of technology can I buy? What can I do? How can I train my people to just flip those boats faster? That's what they're talking about. When they come and talk to me, they just want to get them in and get them out. They don't really want to pay me more rent.
So Joe, let's have a conversation with CSR. Let's sit down and say, what's your plan for this location, and how can we help you in a way that's beneficial to both?
And that now you guys are back to the point that I was trying to make earlier, where I think whatever conversation we had in the past about the redevelopment of the Marina floor, I mean, if that business wants to expand, was that built in there? Are we having the right discussion? I'm not sure today it looks the same as it did, that's all.
Vic?
So it kind of, we all, I think, agree that this is a business that needs to get in the black. We, I think, agree that, we've got some things that are impacting the marina, or the marina dollars, and the fishing pier, the boardwalk, the farmer's market, but those are all things we brought on ourselves. Those are things that we've said, look at our pier, come visit it. Look at our boardwalk, come visit it. Those things we brought on ourselves. And regionally said, come visit this, because we want you here, because we have something. And, we're batting around a lot of different ideas, and I think you sit down and you look at your strengths of your marina, your weaknesses, the opportunities you have. Maybe it's through, expanding CSR, maybe West Marine, different things like that. What are the opportunities? What's the industry trending to? And what are the threats? Just do a SWOT analysis of it. And I think you'll find your answers there. We could beat it around this room all day long until we sit down and really do that, focus on that, and then what's it going to take to support it? Because right now, you can put in paid parking, but if the north lot drops off, it doesn't do you any good. So I think that's the conversation, and maybe that's a special work session where we sit down and just take this one thing and dig into it and put together our plan and move forward. Because we're all saying a lot of the same stuff, but we want to get there, but how are we going to do it? And I think for my part, run the business as a marina. It's also an asset to draw people here. So we have to balance it. But it has to be a viable business, or it's throw the rest of it out.
So what I'm hearing is you want the plan. We want that to include some kind of a logical order of capital improvements and what the benefits would be, the cost-benefit analysis of each of those.
Options in terms of the order and all of that,
Okay.
because I think that we need to see, if it makes sense to do something, because it will actually bring in some additional revenue. If reprogramming for the next 3 years for permanent mortgage in the guest mortgage area makes sense. I don't know what that part of the discussion looks like. Because if we kill off the guest mortgage for 3 years, what does it look like coming back after that, or not?
Sure, that's kind of what I think Councilmember Payne was talking about, that whole analysis.
Yeah, what would the strengths of our marina are that maybe a fishing pier, but that's also a weakness.
Yeah.
So, And what opportunities does that bring us?
And
Or not.
then in terms of development, put up or shut up. I'm sick and tired of hearing about good fit development.
And we
We
will.
need some specific to look at, otherwise, then talk about it. Yeah.
As far as that purpose question, oh, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, Bob.
No, you're not. Okay. This has been an interesting, I said you're doing a lot of listening more than talking, which is rare. The issue is, right now, I think, one of our primary issues, this marina issue. I'm going to agree with Vic on something here. I think that we should handle this as a council as a whole, and not in a committee, and have it studied in committee, and come back with recommendations. I would strongly suggest that once you get all of your kind of marching papers and figure out what you need to do, set up a timeline for that, and then we all come back here and take a look at it and weigh in on it as a whole, not as a committee. Would everybody be okay with that?
Of course.
So when with your permission,
Yes.
when I look at futures and I look at the things that are going to be coming down the pike in the first half of the year, quite frankly, January right now doesn't have an awful lot in it. I mean, even if some of the zoning issues and development issues we've been hearing are going to be walking in the door, we're not going to get to those until probably late January anyway. So we probably, we being staff,
Will you have enough time to?
well, that's what I say, we'll spend the next 6 weeks putting together a lot of this data, a lot of these options, a lot of this analysis, and then let's start having a conversation in early January.
I would be very much in favor of that, and again, as a whole.
And we work better with the deadline.
Yes, absolutely. When we put it on, the futures, then we know, we actually have to do something.
In terms of the things that we stated, I think there's some global issues that we need to have some conversations on during some study sessions next year, aside from the marina. I would like to have one on
You sound like Jack Nisker, you know? You gonna go global here?
I am, Bob. I'm going global. Instead of nuclear.
Take that with you.
I think, how many of you have heard complaints or criticisms about internet access, cable, and everything else?
Yeah.
I think we need to get representatives from the different providers here, and I think we need a conversation about that service here in the city. I'm sick and tired of hearing about it. I think there needs to be some sort of accountability piece in there, and I think we need to investigate options in terms of alternatives.
I say we contact Google and have them bring their fiber optics.
And whether that's Google, whether that's establishing our own utility in that regard, I think that's a study session conversation that needs to happen.
The marina thing.
The marina, obviously, we just talked about.
Well, no, I was going to say, Joe did all this work to put all these things together, and one of the things I would like us to really address is his midterm point, but I think it should be more near term, is change the way the transfer of the general fund is done. Marina revenues are variable, so the decision on the amounts of the transfer should be based on current actual dollars in the bank, not on project revenues for the next year. So we're changing the way we actually fund. If we're going to continue to fund the operating from, instead of just throwing a number at it, looking at what they actually.
And we started that conversation at the last council meeting a little bit in terms of what the marina pays the city for services. It says somewhere between $225,000 and $250,000. Are those based in? How do we track that? Do we track hours? Do they
It's based on activity and costing. It's an indirect model.
I'm sorry.
It's an indirect model that we have that is based on activity-based functions, based on budget support, and then marina and also the swim utility are allocated in an indirect cost. So that's how we come up with that number. But they could be, I believe there's duplication in there. They're paying for services as well, and we're still giving them an allocation of a certain department's expenditures.
So in other words, that number could go down.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, okay.
The other topic, and then and then getting all of the education critters rounded up and herded into a pen so that we could actually have a conversation with them.
I wrote down communities, though.
What's that?
I wrote down education communities, not
Not
critters.
critters.
Okay, yes, so,
And that's what the minutes will reflect.
okay, thank you.
That's what you meant.
Yes, that's what I meant, thank you. Anyhow, so are there other study session topics that, from just a long-term, global, strategic, what, Bob?
I said, there's that term again. Global.
So I actually wrote down 4. The 3 you threw out, the internet, cable access issues and options, the marina, which we've been talking about the last hour, educational communities. I'm throwing down communications. We talked about as one of our short-term goals that we're going to create this plan. Well, I think we really should have a council-level discussion about the detailed elements of what that plan looks like and what it's going to cost to do it.
Sorry, Tony, on the what issue?
Communications, be it our internet sites, our web, our
Social media.
social media use, community forums, neighborhood meetings, our newsletter, city currents. Let's talk about all those things and how we want to do a better job of reaching out to people and just making ourselves so dang accessible that people can find out what's going on in the city with a click of a button or whatever.
Can we add the whole concept to that of the technology updates? Because people reach us like through registrations and, I mean, it's not just sending out communications, it has to do with how can they interact with us
So
to use our services
communications
and service delivery.
It's not quite, I think
Technology.
communications and interactions, or community interactions, user interactions.
Yeah, Pat?
Well, first, we should add to that and how to track it for public records purposes, because that's something we sort of have an idea that we should be doing, but I don't know that we're actually doing it.
I think
Especially now that
that's-
I hear people.
That's one of the details of this type of discussion. Yeah, we're tweeting, but Dale and Bonnie and I talked about that, and Dale is supposed to be using some software that's tracking all the official tweets from the city.
What I'd like to see, and Dan and Michael can talk about this better, but a five-year projection with regards to construction. We've got that band of revenue that we pretty predictable, and then we've got the one-time, how far out are we on some of these projects, and how realistic are some of these projects?
Yeah, Michael and Dan have talked about putting together a detailed list of all potential possible projects. Someone walks in the door and says, gee, I'm thinking about doing X on my property. That goes on the list and we start tracking it.
Okay, I get that, but I'm talking about study sessions for next year, so.
So those are the 4 items.
Presumably that would dovetail into some kind of financial plan. But I think we've been-
So internet, telecommunications, cable, the marina, education.
Communities, and then communications / user interactions.
Okay. Is there any other issue that somebody else thinks that just from a global perspective or a broad perspective, we need to have a conversation? Okay. And
Looking at
then,
UPD,
I was just wondering, is there anything from the police department that you think we,
I think it wouldn't hurt to have at least one study session next year that's dedicated to public
public
safety.
safety, yeah.
I think it should be done by a commander.
Let's let them arm wrestle over it.
Should be done by what?
Take a day off, Chief.
That'll include the legal and the courts too.
Yeah.
what legal and judicial?
It's a good idea.
Point.
Anything else? And Joe, did you get enough from us to chew on? Enough direction from
Well,
us today?
What I heard was the different opinions about what our purpose is. What we'll try to do is, in our plan, we'll try to create a preamble, and we'll take a cut at that, so that the council can look at it and see.
But we're Marina first. I think that was the conclusion.
That's exactly what I was going to say. The
Business
absolute-
first,
The
right?
absolute focus is the marina business first. And then after that, we're talking about some, what's a good way to put it? This is a public place that the public, both in Des Moines and not living in Des Moines, have come to expect that is there for them. But you're willing to have a conversation as to what the terms of that interaction is. Right now, it's completely free. And it may stay that way after we're done with our conversation, but we need to talk about the costs of having that kind of access and opportunity for the public, no matter where they're coming from. But first and foremost, this is an operating marina, and we need to get it into the operational black. And we need to have a plan to talk about how we replace those parts of it that need to be replaced in the next 3, 5, and 10 years.
And the bottom line question is, does it make Scott's life easier or harder? Because if it's harder, then I'm all for it.
And I'll take you this side, and I'll go on the other side.
Just kidding. Great, anything else?
Is this where we sing Kumbaya?
Go ahead, Bob, we'll follow you.
Well, thank you, everybody. We got done earlier today than I thought we were going to get done, and we actually narrowed down the laundry list because I think this next year, having